Hi, this is Rick Ownsman, and today I thought I would do a simple little tutorial on how to print from Lightroom to your Canon Pixma Pro 100 printer. I know that we now have over 24 people in the Boise Camera Club who are using this very printer, and there are many different ways to do it. You can print out of Photoshop, you can print out of Lightroom, you can use printer profiles, you can do lots of different things, but I want to keep it simple. And I use Lightroom a lot, and I print from Lightroom directly to my printer. So let's talk about that, at least the way I do it, which I think is a simple way. See if it works for you. I happen to be in Lightroom at the moment. I am in the library module, and you'll see some of my photos here in a particular collection down here on the timeline. What you want to do is make sure that you are in the have the picture selected that you want to print. You can print multiple pictures, and maybe I'll show you how to do that in a future tutorial, but this will be a tutorial on simply how to pick one picture and print it out so you're ready to go. So let's talk about that for a minute. I am in the library module. I've selected the picture I want to print of this particular leaf. And a couple things to think about. First of all, think about what size you want the finished photo to be. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean what size piece of paper are you going to print on, because they may be two different things. And you're going to see an example of that when I go through this right now. But what size do you want the finished picture to be? So say I have this picture and I want my finished picture to be 11 by 14. Well, it's good practice from the beginning to crop your photo to the size and aspect ratio you want the finished picture to be. So say in this particular case, I want to make an 11 by 14 photo of this particular picture. So let's go to the Develop module and see what aspect ratio this photo is already in. So in the Develop module, assuming I've already done my edit and I have the photo basically done and ready to go, and it's still a raw file, I've corrected it and so forth, we don't have to convert it to another file type. We can print directly from the raw file to the printer. And that's a real nice advantage when working in Lightroom, is you don't have to do anything additional. You can stay with your raw, and you can go right to the printer from there. So that's what we're going to do. You'll notice this is still a CR2 file, which is a Canon RAW file, but it has been edited. So in the Develop module, we're going to go to the Crop tool here. Go to the Crop tool, and you'll notice this particular picture, I've cropped a lot from its original size. And before I started the tutorial, I had already made it an 11 by 14. But let's back that off so you can see kind of what I did. Over here, this is set up for an 11 by 14, but let's say I had left it at a 4 by 6, and you'll notice the aspect ratio changes completely. So get the photo in the aspect ratio that you want for your finished print and cropped how you want it. So let's change this back to an 11 by 14. And say we needed to adjust it a little bit and so forth. We get that how we want it in the frame, and we're good. We say done. So this is how the picture is going to look when we print it. So now we're ready to go to the print module, which is over here. We click print and we go into the print module. So let's talk about what we need to do here. Let's start over on the left side of the page, and I happen to have this template browser open, but we're not going to worry about that for the moment. In fact, I'm going to collapse it so it's not in your way, and I'm going to come down here to Page Setup. When this comes up, you're going to notice a couple things. It's going to come up with the name of the printer that's your default printer, which for me is my one and only printer, the Canon Pixma Pro 100. If you had other printers here, for instance, I do have I take that back, I don't have just one printer, just one that I always use is the Pro 100, but I still have an Epson XP950. I could print to that, I could print to any of these other things. But I'm going to print to my Canon Pixma Pro 100 printer. Now I decide what size paper I'm going to print on. In my particular case, I only have two sizes of paper easily available to me, photo paper. I have 8 by 10, which obviously isn't going to accommodate an 11 by 14, and I have 13 by 19, which I can print an 11 by 14 on. It just won't fill the whole piece of paper. I'll have to cut it out later. That's just fine. So down here, I'm going to pick my paper size. Well, 13 by 19 is what I have on there because I printed that a lot, but you'll see that there are all different kinds of different sizes. And 13 by 19 may not be readily visible to you, but if you look through, you'll see that because they are using international standards, they call that A3+. In Europe, we call that 13 by 19. So that's what I'm going to pick right there, 13 by 19. Down here, I'm choosing what tray I'm going to print from. The default on the Pixma Pro is what's called the rear tray. That's where the paper feed is. That's where you normally put in paper. But if you notice in the pull down here, you also have what's called manual feed. Manual feed is that slot in the back of the printer, and most often you would use that if you're printing on particularly heavy stock because it's a straighter paper path and it doesn't have to curl for that heavy stock, so you might do that on heavy feed paper. But most times, in fact for me about 99% of the time, I use the rear tray, so I just leave that there. Over here, we decide what is the orientation of the picture on the page. Well, you noticed when we had it up a minute ago, the picture is a landscape mode picture, so we pick landscape mode. Simple enough. Let's look at some other things. We're going to come over here to this Properties tab. And if we click on that, we get this screen. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on this one so you can see what's going on. There's a lot of things to make sure are set up here if you want to get your print coming out like you think it should. Before we do anything, I'm going to speak to this box. Preview before printing. And it will become obvious to you when we get ready to go why we do that. But the reason that we check that mark is before we actually hit the print button and send the print to the printer, it's going to bring up a little screen to show us exactly what that's going to look like. That can save you some frustration when you don't do things quite right and it comes out of the printer and it's not what you expected. So by getting a preview, you're able to see this is how it's going to look, and if it's not what you expect it to look, you can cancel the job before you send it to the printer, waste ink, waste paper, and are frustrated. So I just recommend always checking that box and always leaving it on. So now let's come back over here and let's talk about the tabs, and we'll talk about all the individual settings. Well, first of all, we're going to print a photo. Standard is more for printing on plain paper. We're going to print a photo, so we're going to check photo printing. So that's the one we choose. Coming on down, we have borderless printing. We would use borderless printing for the most part if we're going to print a full bleed picture to the edges of the paper. In this case, we're not going to do that, but I'm going to leave borderless printing on for the moment, and you'll see why when I get to a further step. Black and white photo print. If we're printing a monochrome and we want the printer to only use the gray and the black inks, we would check that. And a good reason for doing so is oftentimes when you print a black and white monochrome print, you don't want any color tonality with that. You don't want a greenish tin picture or other tints of color in the picture. You want just black and white. And so by checking that box, you force it to only use the black and gray inks, and you'll get a nice pure black and white picture. One thing I really like about the Pixma Pro is it makes really nice monochrome pictures. So if you're printing a monochrome, check that box. We're printing a color, so we're not going to do that. Now, one additional note, say you were printing a sepia tone picture. A sepia tone picture is usually considered a monochrome, but keep in mind if I click that box and it only uses the black and gray inks, I'm not going to get the sepia tone. So keep in mind when you do that, only check that box if you want a straight, non-color black and white. This one down here I almost never mess with. Color intensity and manual adjustment. We're doing this simple. We are assuming the printer is going to do us a good job and we're not going to have to make additional tweaks. So we're going to leave that unchecked at the moment. Coming on down, we get to choose what paper type we're printing on. And this is a Canon printer, and so it's preloaded with all the profiles for Canon paper. So let's look at that. We're going to check down here, and we have plain paper, which of course if we were printing maybe a business document or something, a letter on plain paper, we can use that. There's no sense in using extra ink. We would check that one, but we're doing a photo printer. And when I click the photo papers, over here I see all the various Canon photo papers. In addition to other glossy paper would be a non-Canon glossy paper. But the paper that I very often print on is this Photo Paper Plus Semi-Gloss. That's a Canon paper. I use that all the time. If I check that, it knows how to set up the printer for that particular paper. So I'm going to pick that one. Down here under print quality, you'll notice I have standard and I have high. High seems to slow the printer down. It takes a little more time, it uses more ink, and theoretically makes a better print. But truth be told, I have used standard for almost everything I do because I frankly can't see the difference. And I can't justify using more ink and doing things slower if I can't see a difference. So I almost always stick with standard. If you are doing a job and you think there's a good reason to use high, go ahead and try it and see if you think it's better. I don't think it's any better. I stick with standard. Over here, we choose what is the size, again, of the paper, not the print, not the image that we're going to print on it. And so in this particular case, we decided we were going to print on 13 by 19 paper. So I make sure I come over here and I pick this one, A3 Plus 13 by 19. In landscape mode. Coming out of the rear tray. You're going to see some duplication of this from some other things you did, but it's always good to always check your settings. Now, if you use these settings all the time, you might want to check this box, and then it will come up with these things already chosen by default. I don't usually do that, but something you might want to think about. Now let's look at some of these other tabs, and some of these will be duplicative. You noticed we were in the quick setup. These get in a little deeper, and you'll notice some of the things we did here we'll copy when we get over to here. So we come to main, we've already chosen our paper, we've already chosen rear tray, we've already chosen print quality standard, we're going to let the color intensity be auto. We aren't printing a black and white print, we do want to preview before printing. So these were all previously set up by other things we did. Let's look at this tab. Page setup, same thing, page size, landscape. We came to borderless, which we're going to leave on for the moment. Down here, amount of extension. This extends the print a little more than the size just so it fills the space. And you'll notice when I hover it, it says second to the right end is recommended. So I figure it's recommended. Unless I have a reason to go with something other than the recommendation, I stick with it. So that's where that stays for me. I'm making one copy of this. If I was making multiple copies of the same picture, I could put in however many I wanted here and then just feed in multiple sheets of paper and it would print out multiple copies of that same picture. But rarely for photos do I make multiple copies. So in this case, we're going to leave that as one. So I'm going to say OK. This tab I won't spend any time with. It's maintenance. You'll notice it's how to tweak your printer for various things. So we'll leave that alone. We'll say OK. And the print setup is done. We'll say OK. All right. So right now, it's showing me that the print would be a 14 by 11. Which is close, actually almost 11, 1/100 of an inch different. I think I could live with that. But we're going to want to check out what's over on this side before we finish. So let's look at each of these one by one. The layout style, We have a single image on the page. That's fine. Picture package would be, say you wanted to print out 2 5x7s or a 5x7 and a 4x6 or other combinations of pictures on the same sheet of paper. You would pick that. We're not going to do that today. We'll leave that with single image, so we're fine. Turn that off. Image settings. These I don't usually need to use. Zoom to fill. Say you had not pre-cropped this picture and you wanted it to zoom to fill the space that you've set up here, you could use that. I prefer to pre-crop, so I don't have to do that. Stroke border you might want to use, I guess. Notice what happens is if I check that box, you can change the color here. And just for grins, let's give this a red border, if I can find where red is. Here, pretty close, there we go. And I'd pick here, and I could say, yeah, I want a red border, and I want it so wide. You'll notice it puts a nice red border on that if I wanted that. Don't want that, turn that off, no border. Simple enough. Layout. Okay, you'll notice here it's provided some margins. I don't want any margins. So notice when I make those all 0, now there's no border whatsoever. And that was something, the function when I said borderless, that's what allowed that to happen. I'm doing one picture, so I have one row and one column. If I was doing multiple pictures, I could do the picture and put multiple pictures in there. And if you pick the picture package, these would probably change. Cell size. This is the size that your picture is going to be. So in this particular case, I want an 11 by 14. Notice if I change these, the picture gets smaller or bigger, depending on what I'm doing. So if I want an 11 by 14, I can type in 11, and down here I can type in 14, and there you go. And it's telling me that this is going to be a 14 by 10 999. I'm not sure exactly why it's not dead on 11, but we're 1/100th of an inch away. I think I can live with that, and it works just fine. So I'm good with that. So let's collapse this one down. Guides. At the moment, you'll notice I can see a ruler up here, and I can see a frame on the picture. If I turn off Show Guides, all that stuff disappears. But this doesn't print on the picture anyway, so sometimes you like to look at that. If I click Show Guides, this is showing me at the top that the particular piece of paper is 19 inches wide and 13 inches high. And that's indeed what size photo or what size piece of paper I'm using. And the picture I'm going to print on it is a 14 by 10 999, well, call it 11 for the sake of argument, so we're good. That's what we want. We'll go to the Page tab. If I wanted the background of the page to be something other than white, I could change that and say I wanted it gray or whatever. Notice it's going to do that, but keep in mind if this prints gray, you're going to be using more ink to print that gray on a white piece of paper. So rarely will I use that. So we're going to uncheck page background color. You can also do things like an identity plate and watermarking and info. Say on the photo you wanted to have the exposure information. Notice it's down here at the bottom now, or I can pick other types of things. Again, rarely use that. Not going to turn it on here. You could choose the font size. You could put a watermark on it. You can do all those things. Don't do those things for most photo prints. Not going to mess with them. Print job. This is important. Print to the printer. Well, sure, you're going to print to the printer, but you don't have to. You can print to a JPEG file. So if I wanted something that looked just like what I see here, but I want it to be a file, I could do that. Now, here's a thought for people who might be using this image for projected image night and want to know how to add a border. Go back to what I just did earlier, add a border, and print it to a JPEG file, and as long as your background was set to black, you're going to have a picture with a border on a black background, something you could use for projected image night. So, something just to think about. We're going to go to printer. That's what we want. We don't want a draft. We want a print resolution of whatever our printer will support. I find 300 dpi works just fine for the Pixma Pro 100, so I turn this on. If that doesn't say 300, I type 300 in the box. Print sharpening. Most people sharpen their photo in edit before they print, so they go, well, why would I want to do print sharpening? I find it works fine if I turn this on, which seems to be the default, and standard is the default. You could go to something else. If you find changing this works better for you, go ahead and do it, but I don't. And it determines the amount of sharpening by the type of paper. We were printing on luster, which is close to glossy. It's not matte, so we're going to stick with glossy, so I don't change that. Now, here's something there seems to be a lot of argument about. Should I let the program manage my color, or should I use a color profile, or what should I do? One of the beauties I like about the Pixma Pro 100 is it does a nice job just the way it's set up. I'm sure the Canon engineers who engineered this to work with Canon ink and to work with Canon paper and do things were no dummies. So I'm figuring the printer knows more about this than I do, and if I wanted to change this to something else, I could use a profile and so forth, which you'll notice I can pick from lots of different ones here. Notice all the various things. I could say, you know, today I'm using Epson paper, or I'm using something else, and so I could pick a display, or I'm sending this out to be printed at Costco. Yeah, okay, you can do all those things, but, you know, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to let the printer manage it. It's done a great job for me. I suggest you give it a try. If that doesn't work for you, you can always change it, but hey, it just works. Now, this one here, print adjustment. Say you print the print, it comes out, and it comes out darker than what you saw on the screen. Well, first of all, you should have your screen calibrated to help avoid that problem. Most people whose prints come out too dark have their screen turned up too bright, which is why that happens. But be that as it may, sometimes this can become a little tweak factor. So you print a print, you say, hey, it's a little too dark. You turn this on, you can turn the brightness up just a little bit. It's going to take some fiddling around to find out what fudge factor you may want to dial in there. If you don't need to use it, don't use it. I'm going to turn it off here. But if your prints come out a little dark, you may want to check that. Ease this up a little bit. See if your next print makes a difference. The other thing to be said is when you are dialing things in to save yourself a lot of ink and a lot of paper, I recommend printing small test prints, sometimes little 4x6s. Check it out. See if your colors look good. If everything looks great, then you can print the big print and use the big piece of paper and more ink. But while you're testing, sometimes it's a good idea to print little prints. For this example, I'm showing you the big print, the 11 by 14, and I could print this to the full size of the piece of paper if I wanted to, which for the Pixma Pro is a 13 by 19. And I could do what's called full bleed, which in other words, the picture would come completely to the edge of the piece of paper, no border whatsoever, and print at that maximum size of 13 by 19. And I do that sometimes, and it makes nice prints. So we're going to uncheck this. We're down to the bottom of the screen. We're ready to print. So I'm going to click print, and I want you to pay attention to what happens. Up here, it's saying preparing print job in Lightroom. It's getting that ready to go. And in a second, what you're going to see is another screen come up, this one, which shows a sample of what this is going to look like when it comes out of the printer. This is what I was talking about earlier, why you check that preview box, is you don't want to waste ink or paper and have it come out different than what you think. So this is showing me that it's going to print on this size paper. It's going to use this paper. It's going to print out of the rear tray, and it's going to come out in this orientation because this is the way the paper will feed into the printer. If you're using a 13 by 19 piece of paper, this is the only way you can feed the piece of paper in. Something else to note is it prints on what would be considered the top side of the piece of paper. So be careful when you put your paper in the printer that you put up the side that you want to be printed on. In this case, semi-gloss paper, it's going to look different than the back side of the piece of paper. I guarantee if you put a piece of paper in upside down and you try and print on it, a couple things are going to happen. You're not going to like it. It's not made to print on that side of the piece of paper. And then also typically because that side does not absorb the ink, you make a mess. The ink gets all inside the printer. It's not good. So always put the paper in a Canon Pixma Pro printer with the printing side up. Now, at this point, you would put your piece of paper in the printer. You would get all ready to go. You would fold down the tray in the front of the printer so it can exit. And all ready to go, you'd hit start printing and it would go to work. If you go, oops, this doesn't look like what I wanted it to look like, this is your chance to bail out with no expense of ink and or paper. So you could hit cancel printing, which is what I'm going to do here. I'm not going to really make this print for the purposes of the tutorial, so I'm going to exit at this point. But this is where you would hit start printing, and if you've done everything right, you'll get a beautiful print. So I hope that works for you. Give it a try. If you have any problems, I'm going to put a contact on this video so you can shoot me a message, and I'd be happy to try and help you diagnose how to get better prints using this simple method out of your Canon Pixma Pro 100 printer. Thanks and good luck.